They smirked when the old woman stepped into the city council chamber, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her hands rough from decades of work in a textile mill, her eyes steady even though her body trembled with age. To the polished men in expensive suits, she was nothing more than another retiree complaining about taxes and land, a fragile distraction they could brush aside with polite words and forced smiles. But she was not alone. Behind her walked her son, Daniel Cooper, 38 years old, tall, his shoulders squared, his presence commanding the room even before he spoke. He was not just a lawyer. He was a former Army intelligence officer who had spent years dismantling fraud rings and exposing corruption brick by brick until nothing was left standing. This hearing was not a formality for him. It was war, and the battlefield was the very land his family had fought to keep alive for generations. 2 years earlier, the council had approved shady liens against surrounding farms, pushing families out one after another until only the Cooper cottage remained. Neighbors who once filled the valley with harvest and laughter were forced to sell under threat of foreclosure. Their homes bulldozed, their land absorbed into development projects that promised luxury condos and shopping centers. The Coopers refused to bend, and for that, they were mocked. Council members sneered at the old woman, told her she would lose everything. They accused her of falling behind on taxes and even filed forged documents claiming she had abandoned the property. But while they laughed, Daniel had been working in silence. He traced the false signatures to a notary already under federal investigation. He uncovered shell companies tied to relatives of council members, companies that received inflated contracts for construction that never happened. He found emails filled with promises of kickbacks and profit-sharing agreements for every acre of land stolen from ordinary families. For months, he gathered affidavits from displaced neighbors, recording their voices, their anger, their heartbreak, every detail, every signature, building a wall of evidence impossible to deny. The night of the final vote arrived, and the council chamber filled with developers whispering about profit margins and glass towers already designed on paper. The mayor sat smug at the head of the table, confident the last piece of land would soon fall into his hands. The old woman sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the wooden table, her fingers gripping a folded handkerchief. Daniel rose slowly, carrying a stack of files so thick it dwarfed the official agenda. He laid them down one by one: forged deeds, fraudulent invoices, shell company registrations, every page tied directly to the men sitting before him. Gasps rippled through the crowd of citizens packed into the chamber. Whispers rose into outrage as Daniel spoke, clearly, every word cutting like a blade. The mayor scoffed, tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off. But Daniel continued, his voice steady. The subpoenas have already been issued, and federal investigators are sitting quietly in the back row. Instantly, the room froze. The developers who once whispered about profits now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, faces pale, beads of sweat rolling down temples that once held only arrogance. Within a week, the sheriff executed raids on City Hall, seizing computers and filing cabinets. Clerks broke under questioning and confessed to falsifying records at the orders of higher officials. Documents revealed decades of corruption, not just against the Coopers, but against dozens of families whose land had been stolen through fraudulent assessments. Developers tried to distance themselves, but the contracts spoke louder than excuses. Millions funneled through fake firms and offshore accounts. Months later, the courtroom was filled, every seat occupied by reporters, neighbors, and families who had once lost everything. This time, it was not the Coopers on trial. It was the officials who once laughed at them. The prosecution laid out the case: fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and theft of public land. The defense tried to paint Daniel as a bitter veteran seeking revenge, but the judge cut through the lies, reminding them that justice does not bow to arrogance. The jury returned swiftly, guilty on all counts. Prison sentences handed down, licenses revoked, millions in restitution ordered to families who had suffered silently for years. The old woman sat with tears streaming down her face, not of defeat, but of triumph, decades in the making. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder as reporters swarmed, asking questions, shouting for quotes, desperate to capture the moment when arrogance finally fell under its own weight. This was not just a victory for one family. It was a victory for every person who has ever been told they were too small, too weak, too powerless to fight back. The council chamber that once echoed with mockery now stood empty, a monument to greed destroyed from within. And the legacy of the Coopers stood stronger than ever, a reminder that truth may take time, but it always rises, and when it does, it cannot be silenced.